To the Governor's Climate Forum. My name is Katie Dykes. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. I'm so pleased to see you all here and so thrilled to have the opportunity to sit with Governor Lamont for this forum where we have a lot of exciting things to cover, sharing some of the accomplishments that we've achieved together, deep with legislators, with advocates, with so many of you who are partners in this industry that is achieving a clean energy economy transition in the state of Connecticut. We're going to talk about a really exciting announcement, a new executive order that Governor Lamont is going to be signing today, committing us to a pathway for planning for reducing carbon emissions, but also ensuring that our state is adapted and resilient to the effects of climate change that we are experiencing even today. And then I know we're going to have time as well for discussion and for hearing questions and having a real conversation together about the ways that we can be working together and making progress. So I'm really pleased, Governor, for you taking the time to be with us today. Just to share quickly, it's been a busy couple of months. We started off with a very ambitious legislative agenda that has given us many things, exciting things to be delivering on here within our department. As you know, climate change preparation, both achieving reductions in carbon emissions as well as preparing for the impacts of climate change, have been something that Connecticut's been a leader on for many, many years. Here in this building, at our department, we've been proud to partner with other agencies and with many of the advocates and stakeholders around the state, as well as our university partners, on preparing a climate adaptation plan through a stakeholder process that occurred in 2009 and was concluded in 2011. Believe it or not, that plan is now several years old. And unfortunately, much of the science in terms of tracking the impacts of climate change is telling us that those impacts are accelerating. And we have more information that needs to inform our prudent planning across our state to ensure that we can keep our citizens safe and protect our investments in our infrastructure from the impacts of climate change in the years to come. We also, here at DEEP, have had the benefit of working with many stakeholders and agencies in the years past through the Governor's Council on Climate Change that was convened in 2015 and underwent a very extensive analytical process to evaluate the different pathways that we have available to us to reduce carbon emissions so that we can keep on track to meet our statutory requirement under the Global Warming Solutions Act of reducing carbon emissions across our economy by 80% from 2001 levels by 2050. The recommendations of that Governor's Council on Climate Change were reflected in a report that was issued in December 2018 that laid out an important strategy for how we can achieve these reductions across all sectors of our economy. Our electric power sector is a place where we've made some of the most significant progress in reducing carbon emissions over the past several years. It now contributes about 22% of the carbon emissions in our economy. And so many programs have been pioneered through the state of Connecticut with the leadership of the legislature. We've been proud to be part of implementing those, including investment in the state's award-winning energy efficiency programs, the conservation and load management programs. We're investing more than $200 million per year that's supporting reducing energy use in our buildings, in our homes, in our factories. These are incredible programs, and I mention them first because efficiency is our first fuel. The megawatts that we don't use are the cheapest megawatts. And this helps us, these programs are helping to support jobs and investment across the state. It's helping our businesses and our families lower their energy costs, which contributes to our economic competitiveness. Here at DEEP, we've also been proud to pioneer in many programs that are helping support the deployment of renewables across our state. Renewables of all sizes and technologies, including some of the first requests for proposals, RFPs, for long-term contracts that we know are necessary to get some of the largest and most cost-effective grid-scale projects developed. We currently have about 13% of the state's energy use under contract to zero-carbon renewable power That includes large solar facilities across the state, investment in fuel cells, which are a major job creator here in our state, and a technology we're really proud to be the home of here in Connecticut. We also have been spurring innovation in renewable programs that people can site on their homes and in their buildings through our net metering programs. And we're proud to be engaged with legislative direction on helping to transition to a new version of net metering that will continue to support a thriving investment environment for solar for efficiency in the state, which is a contributor of about 5,000 jobs here in Connecticut today. We've seen a 30% increase in solar employment alone just in the last few years. So this transition to addressing climate change is also part of growing our economy in the state of Connecticut. So we've made a lot of progress in the electric sector, but we know we have a lot more to do. The transportation sector, for example, is about 38%, accounts for 38% of our carbon emissions. And we're really thrilled to be working with other states on the Transportation Climate Initiative that will help us fund these programs. The governor's budget passed this year ensured continued level of funding for the popular Cheaper Incentive Program where we're partnering with auto dealers to provide an incentive for purchase of electric vehicles. This can be really exciting and important for making progress in the transportation sector. We're also using settlement dollars from Volkswagen to support electrification of transit buses, 10 transit buses down in the Hampton area, as well as other projects. We know that when we reduce our emissions, carbon emissions from the transportation sector, we're also helping to reduce other types of air pollutants that are creating challenges for asthma and impacting public health across the state. So there's a double win when we're achieving carbon reductions in transportation. And we're further reducing our emissions from how we heat and cool buildings, another really important part of that 2018 study implementation plan from the Governor's Council on Climate Change. But building on that 2018 program, we know that it's time that we need to have an even greater focus on the adaptation side of our climate policy. We've heard from many of you and working with legislators about the need to ensure that the same kind of planning process that we've enjoyed on the mitigation side and the carbon reduction side is engaging the best minds in our state, our municipal leaders, advocates, university professionals, and others to help ensure that we have the right programs in place to prepare for climate change impacts. And so later this morning, Governor Lamont's going to be signing an executive order number 3, that is going to be helping us reconstitute this Governor's Council on Climate Change to ensure that it will continue to track progress in implementation of the plans for reducing carbon emissions, but also engage all of the key players in this area on revamping that adaptation plan from 2011 and updating it to address mechanisms that we need to prepare for climate change here in the state of Connecticut. We'll be focusing on several key areas, one being doing an inventory of all state operations and facilities to identify at a high level with the updated information that we have now from scientific advisors, including our friends at CIRCA from UConn, to ensure that we can prudently prepare and understand what those impacts are going to be on our state operations and facilities. We're going to be updating the 2011 adaptation plan with this new information and delivering that to the governor by January 15th, 2021. We're going to be developing subcommittees to look at how we pay for all this, thinking about how to leverage creative financing opportunities to ensure that we can accelerate investment and drive our dollars to those types of investments that will help us address climate change impacts. And then lastly, this executive order also commits deep to analyzing pathways to achieving 100% clean energy electric grid by 2040. We know it's time, and we have made great progress in helping to achieve our carbon reduction goals through our renewable portfolio standard, through our renewable RFPs. But we need to now be prepared and have the tools and pathways to understand how we can also solve for reliability with the least carbon possible. And that's the analysis that we're going to be doing at DEEP through our Integrated Resources Plan under the direction of this executive order. So there's a lot to do, but as you know, we here in Connecticut, we get things done. And we have this legacy of leadership in part because we have so many folks really engaged, such great talent and energy that's coming together at the legislature, within our state agencies, with our municipal leaders, the advocates, and those business leaders who are helping to invest in this clean energy economy and this preparation. But we can't do it without strong leadership at the top. And Governor Lamont, just in the few short months that he's been in office, has provided that. He's directed us at DEEP that this is an absolute top priority. And as we see these impacts of climate change occurring and more visible every day and across the globe, with hurricane season upon us, with forest fires ravaging the Amazon, the leadership that we have in Governor Lamont is absolutely critical to us being able to achieve our part here in Connecticut, both to reduce our carbon footprint, keep our citizens safe, and develop models that we can share with the rest of the states and with the rest of the world about how we can achieve this transition. So without further ado, I'm so pleased to introduce Governor Lamont to say a few words about climate leadership.
Yeah, good words. How's Katie doing? Well, I think we're off to a pretty good start. We're off to a great start. We got a lot of work to do. I'm really pleased to be here with my partner, Susan Beisowitz, a lot of folks in the legislature. By the way, a lot of the initiatives we've taken have been done on a bipartisan basis. We don't always do things that way in Hartford, and we're making progress there, especially on the wind power vote we recently took. And a special thanks, actually, to all the advocates who are here today. You keep our eye on the North Star and how much we have to do. Katie reminds me every day that, climate change is happening faster than we thought. Climate change, the band formerly known as global warming, and it's impacting us in significant ways as a state. And going back 15 years, when Governor Rell, started putting in place studies to figure out how we should be addressing this as a state. And Governor Malloy took the lead as his executive order, what we can do in terms of our state institutions to take the lead. And the first executive order that, with some prodding from Katie, we did, which was, working, physician lead, heal thyself, take the lead by example, state of Connecticut. And what we're doing in terms of efficiency for our state buildings, what we're doing in terms of solar powering our state buildings, what we're doing in terms of moving our fleet to getting off of fossil fuels for our state fleet and our municipal fleets. That was what we did in our first order. And this is our third order. And as Susan, or as Katie pointed out, we're accelerating because what we have to do. We're accelerating not only in terms of what we have to do in terms of resiliency, what we have to do in terms of all of our substations and Amtrak and the water treatment, all of which are at risk, all of which are, in the floodplain. A floodplain that used to be a 100-year storm is now becoming a 50-year storm. It's becoming a 10-year storm. And if we don't take care of that, it's going to be Hurricane Sandy times 3, and the cost to this state will be devastating. And it's not simply about saying we're going to move having a carbon-free electric grid from 2050 to 2040. It's really about what's the state going to look like in 2040? And how do I want this to take a lead in terms of other states around the region and around the country going forward? And Connecticut has been an extraordinary leader here. When it comes to our electric grid, as Katie pointed out, we've made extraordinary progress there. But look, I'd been in office for a month before I started seeing those headlines, Dominion going to pull the plug, Millstone no longer with us, rolling blackouts anticipated. And yet this Dominion, nuclear power, Millstone, provided about 50% of our carbon-free power as well. And if that had gone off, not only would what that would have meant to us in terms of reliable, predictable power, but also what that would have meant, we would have been reverting back to fossil fuels and going the exact wrong direction. So when we got that notice from Dominion, I said, all right, Katie, well, thank God we got the renewables. We're ready to go, hit the ground running. And she said, well, yeah, we'll have that ready to go in 10 years. So we made the deal. We've got Millstone, for the near term. But more importantly, we are doubling down on our renewables. We're going to be ready to turn the corner. The first thing we did, again, is with thanks for a lot of the folks here in this room and the legislature, are quintupling our commitment to wind power, taking the lead there, making sure that over the next 10 years it will represent a third of our power and more going forward. Look, this is not only about a carbon-free future, it's also about our economic sustainability. I mean, right now, we're at the end of all the lines when it comes to natural gas and oil. It costs us a fortune. It means we have the highest cost electricity in the world, and a lot of it is dirty. And by moving to wind and solar and renewables, that means it's now locally based, locally controlled. We're no longer at a disadvantage compared to our peers. The wind power, and we're working in collaboration with Gina and Charlie, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. We're going to be purchasing that wind power together, bringing down costs, allowing us to get more economies going forward. And that will be a significant piece of our energy future. Going forward from there, what we can do in terms of solar. Brian Garcia is here. What we've got to do, let's start funding the Green Bank again. What happened for the last 5 years? We made a deal with people. People are always talking about sweeps. This is money that's supposed to go to energy efficiency, and that's what we're doing. We started that on the first day of this our new budget. And what that means in terms of middle-class homeowners who are often living in incredibly leaky homes, paying a fortune to heat and air condition their place, what we can do with energy efficiency, what we can do with insulation, what we can do in changing out a lot of their utilities. Somewhere here is Steve Cowell. I was on the board of Conservation Services Group. That's what they did in terms of making the world more efficient in that sense. And as Katie said, the cheapest power is the power you don't have to use. It also represents thousands and thousands of good-paying jobs and does a great job in terms of reducing our footprint. That's energy efficiency. The Green Bank, in terms of what we got to do to continue to fund and accelerate funding for solar power, again, locally based clean energy is a big piece of our future. So when we say, an electric grid that is carbon-free within 2040, that's just not it's about where we want to be as a state. That's about moving our heating and air conditioning, or heating certainly more to electrical, bringing down those costs. Because obviously, heat and air conditioning is the second biggest source of, after, power is the third, heating is second, and finally is transportation. Transportation is still the biggest contributor to CO2 emissions. And what's this state going to look like in between now and 2030 and 2040? How does transportation play into that? Well, right now, it's obviously cars and gridlock on our highways, more and more truck traffic going forward. Anything we can do to get those cars moving on the highways, or even better, off of the highways, more people in the bus service. We're talking about having bus service where we reduce the price down to $1 a ride, making it easier for people to get around, making an emphasis upon transportation, public transportation, rail, again, easier for people to go, making our cities major transportation hubs, the same way they were when they were originally, founded a century ago. And what does that mean? That means not only a commitment to people being able to be in our cities where young millennials want to be, where you can walk to work, you no longer have to drive to work, easier to take that public transportation, that bus. It's also invaluable for the future of our state and our small towns, keeping our open space, easier for those that live in a ring community to be able to get to that city going forward. And in terms of what I believe in, I was on the board of the Greenwich Land Trust many, many years. And what we can do to preserve our open space is all about the character of our state. So we talk about what we're going to do for our energy future, what we're going to do for our green future, our environmental future, what it means to be zero carbon in 2040. It's really about a vision for our state and what we want to look like in 2040. And I'll just leave you with a point that we can't do it without each and every one of you. Frankly, we're doing it without a lot of help from Washington right now. This is why we're able to have to take the lead here in our states. And I've got great partners in Charlie Baker and Gina Raimondo, and I went for a fishing trip with Andrew Cuomo. And so our neighbors are on board. We know we're going to take the lead on this as a region. We're going to show the rest of the country what we've got to do. We're teamed up with California and others when it comes to the energy efficiency standards, what we got to do on mileage and such. We're going to step in where Washington maybe steps back. And it's about what type of a state we are and what we want to say to our the next generation going forward. That this is a place you want to be, you want to call home, with values that are dear to us, and a future that we're proud to be able to leave to our children. That's what we're doing here today.
Governor, and now it's time to really engage this conversation with all of you who've joined us today. We have a couple question prompts just to get the juices flowing, although I know this is not a shy crowd. But really, again, what we're doing here today, I have to say, we don't have all the answers here at Deep. If we're succeeding, it's because we've listened, it's because we've leveraged your ideas, and because we're partnering together. We're really excited to take time in this forum. I know it was a priority of the governors to make sure that we have time for this dialogue. So a few questions that we popped up here. I think there's going to be some microphones around, and I don't know if we did cards or we can skip on the cards. Hands up. Okay, great. Yes, right here.
Hi, Samantha Nelson from Sierra Club. I welcome this opportunity to tell you about thinking about. I'm concerned that we're the only state in the region that continues to expand natural gas, knowing that methane is the chief component of natural gas. It's the most destructive greenhouse gas we have. We have a number of things going on in the state where we continue expansion, and we'd really like to see and to work with you to stop those. Those include converting customers. We're actively converting customers to natural gas. We're subsidizing natural gas appliances. We have a law in the books to expand pipelines using ratepayer tax. And most recently, a brand new 650 megawatt frac gas power plant was approved in our state. And we're looking forward to stopping that before it starts with a goal of 100% clean carbon-free energy by 2040. That's going to be operating well into that 2040 timeframe. So I'd like to hear from you about how we can work together to end the expansion of natural gas.
Well, I'll start. The best way to end our dependence upon fossil fuels and natural gas is to make the investments we're making in wind and solar and renewables. Can we do that in the next 5 to 10 years? Or do we need some supports from other ways that we can provide things during peak times and other times where we have some risk? Look, coal represents whatever it is, 35% of power around the country. We've zeroed out coal in the state of Connecticut, and we're going to be zeroing out fossil fuels. Your concern is what are some of the interim things that the state is doing, and we're doing in association with ISO and our regional efforts to make sure that we get to 2040 and a zero carbon place. And I'm doing everything I can to make sure we get to that place as soon as we can. No obligation to buy from the natural gas folks who are here, but we have that as a backup during those peak times where we may be at some risk. But that's a tough question. Why don't you take it, Katie?
I appreciate the question, and I will share with you, Sam, that this is something that we've actually enjoyed hearing from Sierra Club members and others who've been engaging with us on the question about the Killingly power plant that you referenced. But more importantly, how we've always talked about natural gas as a bridge to take us away from oil and coal, which emit more carbon emissions, and help us move through this period where we're ramping up the renewables and zero carbon resources. And we have traveled many years on that bridge, and we see the end in sight. And the challenges are, how do we, our goal at the department, that the Kellingloo Power Plant, for example, is being built as a result of the ICE New England determining a reliability need for the whole New England region. Because Connecticut has a lot of power infrastructure here in our state, we become an attractive place for gas power plants to be built. But the most powerful thing that we can do and are doing to ensure that plants like that run as little as possible is, as the governor mentioned, deploying significant quantities of renewable resources, which can outcompete those gas plants and will ensure that they run as little as possible. But even more importantly, to get to the end of that bridge, is that we invest and develop policies for the types of resources that can keep the lights on and provide reliability, so we no longer need those types of gas plants that can ramp up when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. And so that's why with this commitment to 100% clean energy pathway in the integrated resource plan, we're going to be looking to develop those policies that support energy storage, demand response that can control customer loads and optimize them for when the renewables aren't producing, and the other types of resources that we need to not just meet our renewable goals, but to ensure that we're meeting our reliability needs for the power grid from zero carbon resources. It doesn't happen overnight, but this is a big step that we have to take today to ensure that we're on that pathway. So really excited to be engaging on that topic in the integrated resource plan and on other proceedings that are going to be coming this fall, and engaging with all of you on that. So thanks for that question. Other questions? Did I see a hand in the back? That's a great idea, so people can hear. And I'm going to ask folks to, if you can say your name and where the organization that you're from.
Hi, Patrick Cummins, the Executive Director for the Connecticut Audubon Society. Thank you for this opportunity to speak out today. I'm going to take the first one, but actually have 4 priorities. One is, and they're mostly federal priorities, but I think they're priorities that the state can really help with. The first one is Recovering America's Wildlife Act. It's been introduced into the House and Senate, and I believe that all of our congresspeople and both senators are co-sponsors of that. But that would actually bring $12 million a year additional funding for wildlife conservation to Connecticut. And it also requires a 25% match, which then could be leverage additional work, because groups like Connecticut Forest and Park or TNC or Audubon could provide that match to the state and get funded in a grant program or something along those lines. So that's incredibly important for the adaptation side of things for climate change. The second one is also related to adaptation and mitigation, and that is Land and Water Conservation Fund Permanent Funding Act, which, again, I think most of our elected officials have supported that, but anything the state can do to also push for that. That would actually involve funding for federal and state and even municipal lands if they get the state side. So that's going to protect the lands. That's going to help to buffer the large habitats. You look out the window, there's the Meshamasik forested landscape right across the river from us here. And any additional land protection needs are going to be funded by this, and it will buffer the existing habitats and also mitigate in terms of offer more carbon storage. The third priority is the National Estuarine Research Reserve, proposed National Estuarine Research Reserve, which would give us more tools and information about adapting to climate change in the eastern part of Long Island Sound going up the Connecticut River. And then fourth, working on carbon credit markets so that there's a better and easier way to have our land protected, private lands, family-owned lands, organizationally owned lands such as land trusts, municipal lands. All those lands could be aggregated into packages that could be sold in terms of carbon credits. But right now the markets are not particularly stable, so it's a very difficult process. So I just wanted to give those 4 priorities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great priorities. And I'll share all of those items are things that we've been excited to be working on, tracking, for example, the Protect America's Wildlife Act and that progress. We see that as a major opportunity on the conservation side of our agency. Look, we know that solving these challenges in terms of protecting human communities from the impacts of climate change is also going to mean that we can think about what we're doing in terms of preserving wildlife habitat, recreational areas, and other things. They're providing this co-benefit in terms of carbon sequestration and helping to preserve those types of ecosystems that make our communities, human communities, and built environment more resilient to the impacts of very heavy rain downfall or coastal, flooding and all of those things. So it's so important, the work that we're going to be doing in this executive order and doing it together with stakeholder engagement and input. The question that we mentioned in terms of how do you pay for all of this? There's a major opportunity in thinking about offsets, but also funding for land-based carbon sequestration, which is another fancy word for things that we've been doing for many years but need to scale up around our land trust and preservation. So thank you so much for your comment, and really excited to be working with you on this.
I'll just add, I'll take your good words to our federal delegation and who have been really good on this, but the states are picking up where the feds aren't right now. I think we all know that. And I would urge all the advocates to do everything we can to make sure these initiatives and our environmental initiatives are bipartisan again, like they are in Connecticut. I mean, it was, Dick Nixon that set up EPA, and George Herbert Walker Bush, who really energized his EPA. And this used to be something we worked on together like we are here in the state of Connecticut. And we can't get that away from us. Right now, we're going the other way in Washington, D.C., and that's got to stop. And it starts with you helping to get the moderate Republicans back on the table on these issues. Jerry.
Governor, Commissioner, good afternoon. Geraldo Reyes, State Rep, Waterbury, Connecticut. And the topic is very important. The third point up there is the one I'm concerned with the most, about affecting those vulnerable communities without overburdening them. They're already challenged, if you will, from an environmental standpoint. And I continue to speak about environmental justice in the state of Connecticut, and I think we have a lot of work to do there. And I think that at the end of the day, the services that we keep coming up for cannot cost this population any more money. We're squeezing out people from that standpoint, from that cost standpoint. And then my last point is, when we talk about air quality and we talk about the health status of the state of Connecticut, in the long run, we pay more through medical and health for all the things that we're not doing up front. And I'd like to talk a little bit more how we're not going to overburden the poorest population here in the state of Connecticut. Thank you.
I'll start with that, Jerry. From Waterbury, where they have a water treatment issue right now that is causing distress in some communities. I'm down in Fairfield County, where the folks who live along I-95 suffer the most severe asthma issues because of the pollution coming off of those highways. We've got to do everything we can to make sure, when it comes to environmental justice, that we leave nobody behind. I mean, one of the things I try and talk about when I talk about energy efficiency is what that means to your home, what that means to how much you pay out of pocket that you shouldn't be paying because your leaky windows are heating the outside. What that means in terms of thousands of good-paying jobs. These are the next generation of green-collar jobs. And we better train people for these jobs. This is how you continue to build the consensus around what we have to do going forward. It's not simply zero carbon 2040, but it impacts you and your families every day.
I'll say this is a topic that's really front of mind in our department. It's a goal that I've really set as commissioner to make sure that we're attentive to how all the things that we're doing, our various programs and policies, are ensuring that the benefits of our programs are being shared equally with those customers who, and ratepayers and citizens of our state who are living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to pay high utility bills. We know also that many of these communities are the most vulnerable with respect to environmental impacts and impacts from climate change. So there's really a win-win. And you mentioned in terms of the healthcare sector some of the great conversations, the governor's leadership really driving the focus on interagency collaboration. Have had great discussions already with the Office of our Healthcare Advocate and DPH and Social Services. We see a great opportunity to work together to activate savings on the healthcare system to help support some of our energy efficiency programs and other things. But the most important thing I wanted to share relative to the executive order the governor is signing today, under Governor Malloy, of course, the Governor's Council on Climate Change mapped out a very ambitious strategy for reducing carbon emissions, and which continues to guide our work. And one of the exciting things that this executive order directs us to do through this revamped council is to go back through that strategy and identify for each of those different elements how we're ensuring that vulnerable communities are able to benefit and participate, and how we're considering the special impacts of climate change that they may be experiencing. And that's something that we'll be reporting on to the governor and to the legislature, and excited to help bring that lens to our work. Just right in the last few weeks, we've had some great opportunities to do things like that. We have a shared clean energy facility program for the state of Connecticut that's helping drive more access to solar for those who live in a multifamily building, don't control their roof, and so on. And we made it a priority to ensure that at a minimum, developers have to get 50% of the subscribers for those projects from low-income customers. It's that, taking that discipline in everything we're doing, everything that's coming across my desk, to make sure that we're not leaving people behind, because those, helping those families and those citizens in our state can provide tremendous benefits to us all as we make this path to reducing carbon emissions.
You pick.
It's your forum. I think John Hedges had his stand up, but maybe someone else can help us keep track.
Thank you, Governor and Commissioner. John Humphreys with the Connecticut Roundtable on Climate and Jobs, and I really appreciate what you just articulated, because the three prongs that you talked about in terms of climate action, job creation through infrastructure investment, and then also addressing historical inequities and looking at environmental justice and regional economic justice is our priority. And I think that one of the things that we can look at is that the Green New Deal has provided a good way to package those things. And I appreciate that the Governor's Council on Climate Change is going to begin looking at things through that lens. And one of the things, I appreciate your affirmation of a commitment to offshore wind becoming a third of our power, and appreciate your leadership on that. And then one of the pieces that I want to address these other questions in terms of advancing public understanding and also looking at vulnerable communities is how do we make sure that the benefits, including job creation, flows to communities that need that economic impact the most. And one way to do that is ensuring access to the job training and apprenticeship programs through the union program, I want to say the union training programs for these large projects, and making sure that the lead by example projects for state buildings also are done with project labor agreements, because then we can have local hiring provisions and access to those apprenticeship programs. And then lastly, as you started to say, just to make sure that we articulate all the benefits as we transition our transportation system to transit and electrified transportation in terms of health benefits and access to jobs, and making sure that we're expanding transit for low-income communities and urban folks to get around and get off of the highways. And the last piece of that is just recognizing, I'm sorry, I lost it. I'll stop.
Thank you so much, John. Governor John has been a member of the Governor's Council on Climate Change over the last several years, and as well as a strong advocate for how we can achieve our decarbonization and also support job creation in our state. And so I think, your comments and your support for the offshore wind legislation has been really instrumental. I know Representative Arconti is here. Representative Arconti and Senator Needleman as the chairs of the Energy and Technology Committee. We're really the leaders in getting that bill through. I think this is one of the biggest energy, climate, environment sessions that we've had in history in 2019, and because all of these pieces came together. And so just 2 weeks ago, DEEP launched the RFP for offshore wind. We issued it on time, including with the input of a commission on environmental standards spearheaded by James Albus here at DEEP to assure that our approach to financing clean energy from offshore wind addresses the needs of commercial fishermen and our sensitive environment in offshore. And that legislation also includes commitments to ensure that we can provide a greater recognition of projects that are supporting economic development here in the state of Connecticut, as well as ensure that these contracts include project labor agreements and other types of commitments that will drive this clean energy transition in the state. So I just highlight that to kind of show how these different pieces come together in this legislation that is a product of leadership from the governor, from the legislature, and from all of the great advocates and supporters. We see, that's when we can get big things done. And we did that this past session.
I think your question answered itself. And, we talked about how you make sure the environment is not in the abstract, what it means to the middle class, how you make sure that those are jobs that come back. You mentioned the relationship with labor, make sure labor is a strong advocate, as they've been. I'll just mention one group that you don't have to worry about. It's very relaxing when the legislature's not in session. Great to have you back, everybody, but it's been relaxing. And when the legislature is in session, Susan can speak to this, everybody is mobbed outside of our offices. And I always love it when the students are there. And there's always a couple of classes of students there. And they always ask me about guns or the environment, guns or the environment. So you have the next generation reminding our generation that we better not take our eye off the ball. Steve?
Hi, Steve Cowell, E for the Future, and I don't live in Connecticut. I live in this place just north of here called Massachusetts. But
big mistake.
Yeah. But thank you for calling out the work that we've done, Governor, on energy efficiency. But I want to raise some very difficult issues and challenges, and thank you for working with Gina Raimondo and Charlie Baker, because our energy system is a regional system, and there are some very difficult challenges that we're facing. For example, the Massachusetts Vineyard Wind was just blocked by the federal government for more studies. ISO New England just stopped all solar in western and central Massachusetts because they all of a sudden freaked out about the impact of solar on transmission. Up till now, it's been just distribution system impacts, but they freaked out and said, "Oh, it's transmission. We got to stop this." And so it could be a year of study. Hydro. 2 states just blocked transmission of Canadian hydro. And ISO New England, the generators are working to block energy efficiency from participating in the forward capacity market to bring resources and get recognition. So really, we have a regional challenge, and thank you very much for starting that work, but can we get the states together to really work and collaborate on achieving this goal? Because the last month or two, I've been very nervous about, it can be little bureaucratic things in terms of from the federal government, or even local challenges that we need to work together. So how can we do more of that collaboration in New England to overcome the barriers? Because otherwise we won't get to the 100%.
Well, I thank you for that comment. I think that really, it feels that the more, I'm surprised all the time when I go to these meetings with ICE in New England and with our regional power generators and so on, that people seem surprised that we are really serious about continuing to issue RFPs and pursue investment in efficiency and renewables and to keep scaling it up and to keep going. I don't know why that is. They shouldn't be surprised because we have very ambitious goals that we need to meet, and because our planet is facing a real urgent crisis and we need to take these steps. But where we can do more, sometimes it feels like we're speaking the language of carbon and they're speaking the language of reliability. And they're, worried about how do we keep the lights on, how do we keep the grid operating. They need to start owning our priorities in terms of carbon. And we, through this executive order and this planning for 100% clean electric grid, need to own the priority about keeping the lights on. And we have, the resources that we need. Our electric utilities, for example, are deeply knowledgeable about how to maintain the reliability of the distribution system. They're very skilled in terms of building the transmission that we need in order to ensure that the grid can operate with all of these different exciting technologies showing up on the customer side of the grid. We can get this done. We just need to start bringing that into our policy discussion, and that's what we're really focused to do. Because I think when we're able to bring both reliability and carbon policies together into our state planning, we're going to find that there's a lot of costs that we can cut out of the system, which makes a big difference for businesses and families in the state that have been paying some of the highest electric rates in the lower 48. But the regional conversation is happening, and it's happening in part because Governor Lamont has really made that a priority. Just in March, when we were in the throes of addressing the millstone issue, he reached out to all the other 5 governors in New England to get their commitment in a statement to work with us on addressing these issues going forward. And through his efforts of regularly, reaching out and building those relationships with his Governor Raimondo and Governor Baker, as he mentioned, and now Governor Cuomo, it's really exciting. Our neighbor to the west can be a great partner in helping to make progress in these areas. And that's what makes the difference when you have a governor that is bringing people to the table.
Yes, Steve, the only thing I'd add is while we get together as governors, maybe we're trying to do it on a regular quarterly basis with Gina and Charlie, and then in the intervening 90 days, Katie's working with all of her counterparts to give us this input to make sure we are all, as a region, rowing in the same direction, because I'm not sure, to your point, that we always are.
It's worth doing. Senator Cohen.
Hi, thank you. I just really want to commend and thank you for your commitment through this executive order. I think we have a real opportunity to make Connecticut a leader with respect to climate action. So I'm thrilled and excited. I think I've spoken with both of you about how, we've been focused. There were some things that didn't quite get across the finish line last session, but I think in working together with my colleagues on the Energy Committee, as well as planning and development and other committees within the legislature. And together now, through this executive order, we can get the legislative branch and the executive branch working together towards real climate action. We've been talking a lot with other legislators getting together over the summer about what we can do, in particular coastal legislators, after meeting with folks from Circa, seeing some very frightening maps talking about how we can really get people educated on what we face here in the state of Connecticut. And I think out of that, some really great things are going to come about. Today, I think we will send out, in light of this executive order, some invitations to other legislators to join a coastal caucus within the legislature, which will be really exciting. So together with Kristen McCarthy-Vahey, a representative from Fairfield, I think we'll co-chair that and get this out and hopefully get other folks on board and working together with the executive branch. So thank you. And again, I commend you for this executive order.
Thank you, Senator Cohen. And Representative D'Amico, I know, is here as well. And together, your leadership on the Environment Committee has just been transformative already. You know, the waste sector, for example, spent a lot of time working on that, addressing even things like plastic bags this past session, you know, can be truly impactful in addressing, you know, waste is about 5% of our carbon emissions. The governor, we just toured Blue Earth Compost here in Hartford, which is a great example of a local business committed to our state, young people who've stayed in the state to be part of an entrepreneurial wave that's helping process organics and keep them out of the waste stream. Again, a big driver for the economy and also for carbon reduction. But Senator Cohen and Representative D'Amico were here at DEEP last week. We were scheduled for like a half-hour meeting, and I think maybe it was like 2.5 hours later. We were still had so much to talk about, in part how we can be working together with this executive order and providing all of the information and planning from this process on the executive branch side to support your leadership at the legislature and bringing attention to this issue and how we can be working together. So I'm so excited and grateful for your leadership and environment. I know we've got a lot to do, and I'm excited to be working with you on it. Terrific. Should we take one more?
One more.
Yeah. All right. David Sutherland.
David Sutherland with the Nature Conservancy, and I want to join what I assume is a chorus of people saying, I know we have a debt diet, but I think it would help immensely if we could loosen up even $5 or $10 million in bonding for some local matching grants for adaptation and resilience projects. There's a database online of about 490 projects in about 20 of our coastal and riverine communities. These are projects that have been developed by coastal engineers, by some of the councils of governments. Yale's architecture school has been involved. And these are all projects that would greatly help adaptation and resiliency. They would also provide other important benefits and amenities to the local area. And every dollar that we invest now is going to save vastly greater expenses when the next storm hits. Disaster relief funding used to be a slam dunk in Congress, but it's unfortunately in that partisan environment down there, it's not a slam dunk anymore. So states facing disasters might be waiting quite a long time, depending on some of the politics involved. So a small amount of bonding for local resilience matching funds would be very, very helpful. Want to, again, thank you so much for the offshore wind and the legislators and advocates here who push that, and for including that commission on environmental standards. I think they did a lot of really good work in a very short amount of time, and really look forward to seeing you incorporate some of their recommendations as the bids come in. And lastly, third priority, just want to mention storage, that I think to satisfy some of the concerns about impacts of renewables on the grid, we're going to have very, very robust storage capacity, not only with utilities who were given some authority in legislation this year, but also local homeowners, businesses, large institutions. So I'd be curious as to whatever you think or Brian Garcia thinks we can do in terms of state policy to advance storage. Thanks.
Well, there's so much there. First, David, really appreciate your help with the Commission on Environmental Standards, and TNC is a major thought leader in terms of how we can address resilience and adaptation. Excited to be partnering with you. On storage specifically, this analysis around 100% clean energy grid is meant to identify what is the target, the amount of storage that we need to be deploying across our grid to, again, solve for both carbon and reliability. And storage comes in many forms and many sizes. So likely this will include both grid scale storage, but also behind the meter storage that can be paired with the distributed smaller solar arrays that are deployed all across our state on rooftops. And we know that will open up opportunities both at PURA in terms of evaluating storage that could be deployed as part of the utilities distribution system plans, I would expect, as well as things that we might look at more on the grid scale side. At Deep. So really excited. Look, the battery costs are coming down. This is the bright spots of climate news are that things like electric vehicles, battery storage, solar panels, offshore wind, all the technologies that we need to reduce these emissions are available to us, and the more we do of it, the cheaper they're getting. And so we see a real opportunity to seize on storage for the state of Connecticut, and we're going to be focused on developing those policies that will likely be bringing to the Energy and Technology Committee some of these concepts in the near future. I don't know if you want to talk about some of the...
Well, I'll just... You're right. I've had 36 state senators all come into my office saying, I know we're on a debt diet, Governor, but... So and we have to... This is really important to me. I mean, Katie came in. Don't worry. You've got a pretty strong advocate there. And we're putting a dam on the Sucker... What was the Sucker Brook. And I said, really? Is this one of our absolute priorities? But given increased flooding, given what's going on, it was an absolute priority. We had no choice but to do it. And that's why, look, we're having a little battle about what you bond for. Do you put all the transportation into the bonding, because that would probably crowd out the next Sucker Brook or something like that? Or how do we pay for these things? But there's nothing more important than making those investments that are about public safety, about resiliency, and about what this state is going to look like going forward. And it's one of the things from a politician's point of view that is so important about the environment to me is it's not all transactional. Finally, we're fighting for something a lot bigger than ourselves. And it's an investment we're making that you're not going to necessarily, Sucker Brook, you'll see the benefit of it next flooding season, but these are things that are going to make a difference for the state going forward 10, 20, 30 years. And our job as leaders, each and every one of us in this room, is to convince people who are sort of feeling a little beleaguered. Jerry talked about how expensive everything is. These are the type of investments we have to make if this is the state we love and the country we love is going to be for our kids what it's been for us. So I think you're going to know where my heart is on this thing. We're going to tussle every once in a while on this item or that item. But I need each and every one of you as advocates continuing to step forward and step up. You don't have to worry about the young people, but make sure that this is something. Look, Christine and the legislators have really been strong on this, and I could not be prouder. But we need to keep the pressure on. It says a lot about who we are as a people and what we are as a state, and I'm not going to take my eye off that ball. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah. I get to sign something.
All right, well, if folks want to gather around, this is going to be a joint effort, so you might as well be in the picture. Invite some of our legislative leaders, folks that are involved in the GC3 and others.
What's with this dinky pen? We usually have these fancy pens.
This is an executive order. I guess we're using the cheap stuff.
How's that? Denise Merrill signs it.
Yeah, that's done.
You get the pen. You had the pen.
I will treasure this.